Hello, welcome back. Steve Bonacontri from SOA Consulting Services. Once again, we're continuing our Introduction to Angular 4 tutorial, and now we're going to take a look at some code examples. So the first one we're going to look at is a right out of the box CLI generated application within WebStorm, and we're going to call it the seed application. I'm just going to show you what WebStorm generates with the CLI project startup, and just briefly show you what comes out of the box when you start a project with CLI. Then we're going to talk about the Hello World application. Once again, it's very simple. It starts with the seed, and I just introduce several more features and show you a little bit more about the application functionality within Angular. And then we talk about a basic application, which really is an introduction to Angular that shows features like dependency injection, templates, services, and other aspects of Angular. And we're going to talk a little bit about pipes with a fourth example. So let's dive into it. Okay, so first I just want to point out that WebStorm has the capability of creating a new project. And when you do that, you have the option of choosing an Angular CLI project. And in the process of doing that, when you decide you want to create something called seed, what'll happen is it'll go through the process of running this script and building all the resources that you need. And so you really don't have to do much. You pretty much wind up with a real live functioning project. So basically what Angular CLI does is it comes with this configuration, and it defines certain aspects of your application, and those resources are located within the project. And so there's really two levels of files generated. Some of these high-level resources, and then there's lower-level resources which are directly related to your app. So, there's a couple of important files that you would typically consider, your package JSON and your node modules, but everything is built here for you. CLI actually has you start off with a project where the node_modules package is created, populated. You have a default ts config.json, which has your compiler options. You also have a more app-specific file which extends from those settings, and you basically have an app folder with your application. You have an environment folder which I'll talk briefly about. And then you have your index.html, which is generated and always uses an app-root. Okay, and that's the thing that uses the root component, and the root component is bootstrapped in the Angular application. So first, let's look at a couple of things. And so I'll try, and also there's some testing code here, which I'm not going to get into. But let's take a look at the module and just see what we have here. First, I'm going to just reformat my module. Okay, so looking at the module, let's see what we have. Okay, first of all, there is a main.ts file. So going back to the Angular CLI, notice that it describes the main app as main.ts. If you look at main.ts, it really is my app module driver. Okay, it loads an app module and it bootstraps it. So we have an application module. It's a simple one, but we have an app module. That's our root app module, and basically that is the application module that gets bootstrapped with the main.ts file. Now all this other stuff here, we're using Angular Core. We enable production mode if we're running in production, and I won't get into too much of this, The enable a prod mode will basically remove all the assertions that you might be running in development mode, and this environment production can be overridden with Webpack or some configuration when it understands that you're building in production. But let's focus on application functionality here. Now, since it bootstraps app module, let's take a look at where app module is. App module is in app.module. So here it is right here. And now we take a look at this file and say, what is this thing doing? Well, this is defining an application module, and it's using a browser module and ng module, and it imports an app component. The application module declares app component. It imports browser module, doesn't have any providers, and it bootstraps the root component. Okay, now let's look at the root component now. That's an app.component. So here's the app.component, and this is really the component which is the backing object of your application, as simple as this may be. Your seed application, let's say. So it has a selector called app-root. It also defines a template URL, which is here, and a style sheet, which is here. And basically the app component has an attribute called title, and it's defined as a string app works. Let's see what the template does. The template is just showing a markup fragment, and it's displaying the title. This curly brackets is an expression in Angular which takes this attribute in the component and dynamically displays it in the template. The style sheet is here, and we're defining different background colors. So let's go see what happens when we run this application. Okay, so first let's go into our project. Let's see what we have here. We have seed, and now notice what version of Node I'm running, what version of NPM I'm running, and what version of CLI I'm running. And this will also give me the version of the project which I am in. So ng is the CLI command line interface for Angular, and it's telling me my CLI is 1.0, my node is 6.10, and my Angular is 4. So just remember, when you're creating a project, what I did when I started Angular 4 is I made sure my WebStorm was up to date using TypeScript 2.2. I made sure my CLI is up to date, and I made sure my Angular components were up to date. Okay, so let's do this. Let's go back and let's start the application this way. So I'm doing npm start, and this is going to take a little bit of time. But let me show you what that actually is. Go to the package.json file. What you see is there's some scripts here. ng start does an ng serve, so it's going to run the server. I could do building and testing, etc. using npm. I could also explicitly invoke ng serve if I really want to. Okay, so I'm going to get the I think I'm going to bring up the Chrome browser, but let's just see what happens when this happens. Now notice I'm running the ng live development server, and it shows that it's running on port 4200, and it's now up and running. Let's see what happens when I actually go to Google and hit on that port. Okay. So basically what I see, what I'm looking at here is the HTML file, which has the blue background, and this little real estate here is my Angular app. And all it's doing is it's taking some value in the component and it's displaying it on the front end. So let's play a little bit with this just to see what happens here. Okay, notice my component has some styles here. I picked rosy brown on this. Let me do something here. Let me change the color of it, and it's updated the color of my component template. Okay, so that's the simplest application that you could write with the seed. I think when I first generated the seed, I might have had some inline templates and styles, and I sort of externalized it, and I just wanted to show you a little bit about that. Okay, so let's do this. Let's close this up. And let's kill this. Now notice, okay, so let me just move on. But at this point in time, I could have done this and tested the app, and it would have succeeded, and it would have used all the test programs in there and show you that the test passed. But as soon as you start changing that string app works, the tests start breaking, and you have to modify the test, etc. So now we're going to look at a different example, and that example is going to be Hello World. Okay, so this is our second little example we want to demonstrate. It's a Hello World example. It has the same Angular CLI. The only difference is the name of my project has changed. I try not to change this, but just because my goal is to learn and teach Angular 4 and not get too caught up with configuration, packaging, building, deploying. We have to learn Angular first. So let's do that. So now let's look at this application and take a look at what I have here. It's very, very similar. You've got an app root tag. You've got a main.ts file, which is a driver for the app module, just like we did in the last example. It's bootstrapping app module. App module is in this file. The application module is bootstrapping the root app component, like in the last module. So we declare the app component, we import browser module. We do not have any providers yet, and we're bootstrapping app component. App component has something a little bit different here. I have an internal template, so I didn't externalize my template here, and I don't use a style sheet. And what I do is I use this back tick mark to do a multi-line template. You could hardly see it, but it's useful because you could do multi-line markup fragments in your component. And once again, I do hello name, and name is the attribute of my app component, and I define the name in the constructor as world Angular 4 is really fun. So basically, this markup fragment should wind up saying hello world Angular 4 is really fun. So let's get that started so we could see that. once again, I have the environment files here. And if you look at my test programs, I actually did update the test to check for a different string. So these tests should also work. Okay, now we've completely compiled successfully, so now we can go look at our example. And here we have Hello World. Angular 4 is really fun. Okay, so what we did was demonstrate a little bit more functionality in the inline template and the tick mark and the multi-line template here. Everything else was pretty much the same. This here is referred to as interpolation in Angular, but I'm not too fond of that because I know what interpolation means and I see it as a different thing. So let's move on to the next example. The next example is a little bit more interesting. I'm going to leave this up. I'm going to kill this. Okay, now this is a basic example. It's going to introduce services and providers and things like that. So if you look at my project, once again I have index using an app root. My style sheets are still empty. I haven't done anything with them. And I have 4 components: application, footer, navigation, and product list. Okay, so let's take it from the top. Here's your driver. Your bootstrapping app module. App modules here. I think this is already formatted, but let me see this. Okay, now your app module says that you're using ng module. That's for the annotation. You're using browser module. And then you also have application component, navigational component, footer component, product list component, and you're even importing a service. Okay, so I'm using 4 different components. I still don't know the relationship between those components, but I'll find out shortly. Okay, the ng module says you're importing browser module, and you're declaring app component, footer component, product list, and navigational component. You have a provider called product service. When you declare this, it means that now I could inject that into components constructors, and I could allow a component to use that service. And I'm bootstrapping application module, therefore that's my root module. My root component. So I have some idea of what's going on here. Let's go to the root component, because that pretty much, I'm going top down here. Okay, so this is the root component. I have 2 attributes of my component, content and dev URL. I'm defining my content to be some string. This is the application component output. And I define my dev URL to be something that's exported out of URLs. In this config package, there's a URLs, and I have a dev URL there, which is exported. So that gives this module, this component, the ability to use it. So when you export a variable, it's seen by other modules and components. So here I'm importing it and I'm using it to define this attribute in this component. Now, so I know I'm going to have these two attribute states, and I'm using a template URL and style sheet, but let's look at the template. The template says render my content. This is the content attribute in the component. So whatever the value is, my template's going to show it, because this syntax binds that value in that component to this markup fragment. And I also do the same thing with the dev URL. I bind that value in the component to my template. And now I also have a navigational child, a product list child, and a footer child. So this parent root component has 3 children. And they're very simple children, at least the navigation and the footer are. The product list is a little bit more sophisticated because it renders values. So let's take a look at those. My navigation component has a content string, and it just says, defines that content attribute to be a string, which is, this is the navigational component output. The footer component is saying this is the footer component, and it's defining its content. And if you look at the templates are just rendering that value. So what we have is a navigational component which says, I'm the navigational component on the front end. We have a footer that says, I'm the footer component on the footer. And let's take a look at the product list. The product list is a little bit more sophisticated. It has a products array, and it uses a generic. It's an array of product, whatever product type is. And the syntax here for the constructor allows me to inject a product service into my constructor and reference it via the product service variable. Inside my function, I go and get the products and I define it to be the products. So this array is getting populated. And then the content is being displayed as, this is the product list component output. So let's see what the product list is rendering, because we know we have a class which is called product list component, and we know it has 2 states. Well, before we even go there, let's see what products is getting populated with. It's calling the product service, and it's getting products, and that's what's being populated in there. So let's take a look at the service. Oh, here's the services. The product service and the product come out of the services product.service file. So the product service has the product class and a constructor, and the product service get products function returns an array of product. And here I actually define some dummy data for products, but when it returns, I map it, this data, these JSON objects, for each one of them in the products array, I map it to a product object with the constructor. So this is an array of products. Okay, so let's go back to product list. So this thing is populated. Now let's see how this is rendered. The template for product list basically renders the content, which says, hey, I'm a product list component. So you're going to see that. I have some styles here. My color list different, so you might see a different color for the product list as well. But if you look at the syntax in the HTML, what you'll see is directives. This directive ng4 says, let product of this array, and for each one of those, do this. So what Angular does is it says, okay, let product equal the first element of this array products. It creates some scope, and then it allows you to render the title and description of prod in that scope. And then it goes to the second iteration, and prod changes. And you get different titles and different descriptions for each iteration. You also have the product price here. So this is the power of directives in Angular. We're doing binding. We're doing using directives to iterate over arrays. Now notice this is an array in the component. This is a temporary object in my template. Within a scope of each iteration, I have a variable. So, and don't get too confused with this. This was that was some Bootstrap style, which I don't believe I'm using at this point. Okay, so now let's go and take a look at the app template again. It's gonna render some of this information, and then it's got this child and this child and this child. Okay, let's go take a look at that and run it. Now notice, it's hard to understand this when you're looking at Angular 4, but Angular looks at the root component and looks down at the children of the root component. It's a hierarchy of components in a tree shape. So when you look at this, you have to think parent component with 3 different children that are side by side, or 3 different leaves. And right now, they're not that tightly coupled because the product list is doing its own thing. It's not wired to any data in the parent. The product list is a self-contained reusable component that is calling a service and generating results. Okay, so let's see what happened here. We have the HTML page, which appears to be white. Right? We have the root application component, which appears to be this rosy pink. We have rendered a dev URL, which comes out of the app component, and it has a value which we defined. Then we have a navigational component, which is rendered in a different color. It's orange. And then we have the product list component, which is iterating through a loop. And for each time it's rendering a phony image, a price, a product name, a short description, and it goes to the second iteration of that object, etc. Then at the end, it renders the footer component. Let's take a look at it one more time. Navigation, style, dark orange, I don't think so. Let's call it, let's see if it has something like a plum. Let's look at the footer. What color is that? Royal blue? Sea green? Let's go for something like lawn green. Okay, and that really ends the discussion on this example. Okay, so what did I want you to get out of this example? Well, I wanted to show you that you can externalize your templates and style URLs. You can categorize your components in a component directory. You could define configs several different ways. I did it the simplest way. You might want to think about using a provider for configuration, etc. We also did use a provider of the service. Notice we defined product service as a provider, which allowed us to inject that into any constructor. So that was another important thing we did with this project. Okay, let's take one more look at a simple example which uses pipes. Okay, so this is the example. Let me close this down, and let's look at pipes. Okay, it generated a little sample program that just to demonstrate pipes, and in the index file, once again, I have an app root. I have a main module. Same thing. I'm just driving my app module here. My app module points to an app component, and it bootstraps that app component. And let's see, let's look at my app component. My app component uses the selector app root, and it has a template in the style sheet, and I define some values in the app component. This app is built using Angular 4. That's the title. I have an amount, I have a number, I have today's date, and I created an array with some JSON data in it. And now what I do is I'm just going to demonstrate what the pipe operator does. Okay, so the first thing I do is I display the title. And then what I do is I take the title and I pipe it through uppercase, pipe it through lowercase. So this operator is called a pipe, and what it does is it takes the dynamically generated or changing data within your component, in this case title, let's say, and it filters it through an uppercase function which is built in Angular before it renders its new value. Okay, and then I also show the job title. I'm going to just say JSON array here. And basically it takes the array and pipes it and generates a JSON object. I also have a my number, and I want to display it as a %, so I pipe it through %. I have an amount, and I'm going to display it in USD currency, an amount, and display it in Euro currency. And I have a date, and I just format it using the pipe operator. So this is very simple use of built-in functions in Angular for using the pipe operator. What I can say is, looking at Angular 2, I thought pipes were not mature enough. Angular 4, I've yet to get the complete list, so I'm just testing these things out. But it still doesn't look as complete as it did a while back with the older version of Angular. So something tells me they're still working on some of these things. I will let's run the app and see what happens. Let's see if I have any. I'm not using any styles yet. Really not crazy about how long this takes. And with Angular 2, and I use Live Server, it was very, very quick. But I'm not too concerned about it right now. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, and what I want to get out to you folks is how to build Angular applications. And so we don't really want to mess with some of this stuff right now. And I do believe it's doing a lot of stuff to optimize here. Angular 4 comes with a lot of optimization, makes your app size much smaller. Okay, the original title is "This app is built using Angular 4." Uppercase, "This app is built using Angular 4." Lowercase, "This app is built using Angular 4." The JSON array is being displayed. My percent number is 43%. My amount is $94 in euros, and the date, the format of my date is now this. So that ends this little introduction to Angular with some simple code examples. We'll move on to more sophisticated things next section.